record. Okay, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good
Can you
morning.
hear me? Yeah, good.
Yeah,
Hey, is today the last day of summer or is tomorrow? I can't quite figure it out this year.
I think it was yesterday, right?
No, I don't think so. The internet search I did says it's the 23rd, which I don't know if
Oh,
tomorrow is. So I think it's late this year or something. So I think we're still in summer. So anyway, happy last day of summer if I'm correct, or otherwise fall, happy autumn if you're correct. Seems like this is an odd year politically or in public policy. There's just a lot going on. We've never, well, I don't know, you're the historian. Have we ever had a current president's son and the past president indicted? And there are some like hate groups out there that are pretty significant. It seems like, I don't know, that there's a lot of personal animosity in families and, and the parties are still so dysfunctional. I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of weird stuff going on. Is it always this way, or is there a lot of weird stuff going on?
there's a lot of weird stuff going on.
Okay.
As you were talking, I was trying to think of any parallels. I guess Watergate era.
Yeah, the
Um,
60s, 70s was a weird time in America. Yeah.
mid
That,
'70s.
that's,
It does kind of feel like
yeah.
we're going through the mid '70s again.
Yeah. And is there, I mean, obviously the Civil War was, way worse than right now. But are there any other weird times besides mid 70s Civil War, or
Oh,
this is
sure.
a
Yeah. I
weird
mean,
aberration?
yeah, we always overlook the Gilded Age depressions and uh,
Okay.
everything that happened between 1865 and 1912 is just erased from our memory somehow.
Okay. Yeah. And we've mentioned that before. We might get back to that a little bit, but here's where I kind of wanted to start today. It seems like there's been a significant break, and I try to be really alert to. Thanks, Jake. When is fall? I can't tell. You didn't have it in there. Maybe you can read it, Professor, while I'm talking. It seems to me like there's been a break of social norms, and maybe I'm not right. Maybe it's just maybe I'm getting older. But there used to be a lot of established groups, the Boy Scouts of America and the Roman Catholic Church and I don't know, the Sertoma Club, Optimist, Rotary, and those all groups are still here today. The Republican Party, the Democratic Party, those are all still here. But it seems like there's just a kind of a distrust of every group, whether it's media or military or government, or you can just go a service organization or even, social clubs. There's been breakdowns of, and I don't think they're all stealing from their members or something, but it just seems like there's an anarchy among almost everything, families, but maybe I'm wrong. So I kind of like to begin at the beginning, and I don't think I think it's called Freedom, National Freedom. Well, I can't remember which one that was. But you made me read a bunch of books, and I still haven't. I need to read a bunch more books. I was really surprised in reading the founding of the country. Now I want to go way back to the beginning of the country. And I have a guess or two after reading a couple of those books you've made me read, that there were some powerful groups and the king's family, and the king's apparatus. But there were also corporations that were bringing people over. One of my ancestors who brought over as a bond slave. And so I was really surprised to read about some groups, and we all know the religious groups, the fleeing for persecution in Europe somewhere, and they wanted to come here and have their own tribe. But can you give I've given a convoluted examples of important groups in the founding of our country. But can you kind of just lay a big framework of, I mean, was it rich people that was the most important group, or was it religious people that were the most important group, or were they corporate stuff? I mean, obviously there was a group of slaves. I mean, what groups were at the start of our country? And then I kind of want to equate it to today.
Well, uh, what groups at the start? I mean, it was an incredibly diverse, intellectually, ethnically, um, um, religiously group, and essentially, it wasn't that Americans were somehow better than anybody else. It's that we tried all of the previous bad ideas, and eventually settled on um, a framework that says that we have a society and a culture that preserves rule of law, and that rule of law is the only way you can get such a diverse group of people to live together in peace.
Okay,
So,
so you're talking originally, you're talking after not only 1776, but when the framing of the Constitution. Then you're
well,
talking
but
about the
I mean, I would actually go back before that. I would, I'd say in the 1700s.
okay.
Once you get past the will this colony survive,
But is
so
that a couple thousand residents in the colony that can survive, or tens of thousands of
it's tens
residents?
of thousands by the
Okay.
1700s. I mean, we have some
Each
fairly
colony would be tens of thousands in
right,
order
right.
to be sustainable.
Yeah, so you've got
Okay.
pretty complex and pretty diverse sets of circumstances. And I was just looking on completely separate issue at something in that was being debated in different New England state legislatures, and I was just struck yet again last week that just all the differences of opinion and how deep the divides were um,
But you're
over.
talking mostly religious or lifestyle
No,
or
I just went down this rabbit hole. I started looking first at the laws dealing with slavery, because slavery was legal and, in the British Empire, and how do they handle that in the different, not just colonies, but settlements and towns. And then I got off on a tangent, because then I saw that one of the guys had also had a role to play in the Salem witch trials. So then I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder what the role of religion was and how they handled this stuff. And were there any, this? So I just spent a few hours last week looking at how, different New England towns and settlements dealt with, religious disagreements, and the slavery versus anti-slavery and versus
but
individual.
some towns had banned slavery even before the founding of our country, correct?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, it was a long process. That's what I mean. This isn't something that just like happened in 1770, right? This is the people are debating these issues for 100 years
Well, so
before
on
that.
that example that when you were going down this rabbit hole, is it a group of people that were abolitionists and did they define themselves as such, whether it was religious based or economically based or morality based? Are they,
It was almost all religiously. I mean, it was
but
almost all
did they view
religiously based.
themselves as a group though? I mean, that we
What it
stand
was,
together?
I mean, you had congregations where you had individuals who had strong legal and religious opinions, and they would often become influential within their own parish. But it would be the equivalent of like, I go to church with a couple guys who are used to be DAs, but now they're both judges, and they're just respected members of the community. And if they were making an argument for a certain way of interpreting the law, everybody in the congregation would listen to them.
Have a pretty good influence. Not everyone would agree, but it would
Yeah.
be
So in many
okay.
cases, you would have, a pastor here or there who would be preaching a very specific version of how to deal with either slavery or the witch trials, or the intersection of religion and politics. And you had as many different opinions as you basically had people. And it's really no different from today, where somebody will say, someone else will often say something and you'll think, yes, that's exactly what I think.
Sure.
But you're saying it better than me. So
But were there individual rioters, so to speak? Right? Was there somebody that was just at the local town bar that was an advocate or a drunk and loud, and then all of a sudden he became some hero and he had influence, or where's the power structure? Where is the group?
I will just admit that I don't know of those examples, because those certainly weren't the people who were, changing anyone's minds, or
But the same today then. You mean the people that went to college, or the people that were religious based and had a group of people around them? I mean, it's the same as today, right? Or corporations. You've ignored my corporation point so far. Were there major corporations that had huge influence on the founding of our country?
On the founding of the country, well, this is different. I mean, I'm talking about like the 16 and 1700s. So
Uh-huh.
fast, I always want to make sure you're asking me to fast forward another 50
Yeah,
years,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
or 100 years in some
Yeah.
cases. Were there corporations that were influential? Yes, I think, and the ones that were probably the most influential were the ones that were the British companies that were doing business with the American colonies,
Mm-hmm.
because they really wanted the trade relationship to go back to normal as quickly as possible. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not so much that they were, believed in American ideals or anything, but they were the ones who were putting pressure on the British Parliament to, let's get this passed so that we can get back to doing business with them.
Wealthy families that ran
Oh yes,
corporations that,
and wealthy
yeah.
families were always doing business with one another. I mean, almost everybody in the United States who was, engaged in agriculture, they would have a kind of a bank in England or a trading house that they were doing business with. And so those people, of course, they knew them. They were friendly or, excuse me. And yes, they were often connected with wealthy trading houses and wealthy, bankers back in England. And they were the ones who had, they did have an influence over, Parliament, and they could advance a, if not pro-American, at least pro-business agenda in the British Parliament.
So around the founding of the country, we've talked about corporations, religious groups. I've hinted families.
I guess I should also mention the other way that they were influential was after the report on public credit and the report on manufacturers. So when Alexander Hamilton was establishing really the United States, functioning almost like a de facto prime minister, getting our public finances in order, realizing that he wanted a system that would reward people who invested in the United States and punish people who bet against the United States, which had
Okay.
the effect of rewarding wealthy people and speculators, which was politically unpopular, but it was based on the idea that you want to strengthen the credit rating of the United States, and it meant that the United States became the most stable place to do business in the world. And
You mean you're talking 1780 something?
oh yeah, it was a miracle. I mean, you could say that by the time Washington left office, the United States was probably the best and safest place to put your money.
Really?
Yeah, which is incredible. So, I mean, if you think about, I mean, people aren't joking when they say Hamilton's a genius. And if you think about his true genius, it is, how do you get a bunch of people who were literally shooting at you and trying to destroy you to become invested in your success? And,
Yeah.
within a few short years, the British government is heavily invested in the success of the United States, even though they are hostile to the United States.
Right. We fought another war, I think, right?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Okay.
but again, Hamilton understood that there are people in Britain who matter a lot, and people in the United States who matter a lot, and you get any of those people who are rowing in the same direction as you. You want to make their rowing more powerful.
Okay. I didn't know how we'd get to it, but that kind of gets to why I wanted to have this conversation on groups today. That hasn't changed. That's still true today. There are powerful, wealthy interests that want to sell their product or service and are willing to use influence and legal influence. I think it's still rare. I know we see examples of it all the time, but I still think we have a pretty clean system in America compared to others throughout history. But maybe this is your chance to correct me. But there's no doubt that politically powerful corporate interests and wealthy families are heavily engaged in our society. And they're doing it for self-interest, right? They like their wealth and they want to have a new home or a new yacht or a new plane or a new island or whatever they do. Maybe they're just into the kicks of selling a lot of product or service, but it's a little bit more than just wealth. I mean, there's ego, there's all sorts of, maybe legacy. I don't know. There's all sorts of things involved. That hasn't changed. It sounds to me like America today is the same as it was during our founding. Which can now educate me.
Well, the concentrations of wealth are so much greater now that wealth is
Greater than the King of England in our founding? What?
uh, yeah, yeah,
Really?
yeah.
You mean
I
you're
mean,
talking Musk and Bezos? You're talking that concentration of wealth is more than the King of England in our founding?
he's not. He wouldn't rank among the wealthiest people who has ever lived, and so, yeah, the people even accounting. I guess if you were to count, no, I mean yes, I or
Huh.
yes, as I think of it, yes, Elon Musk is wealthier, and it's not close because if you think about the amount of wealth that England was generating all in, and if you were to claim all of that land and all of that, you know, it would still be, the GDP of an extremely poor country now, which
Huh.
Tesla's and Elon Musk's personal wealth and Jeff Bezos and probably Warren Buffett. Probably, I mean, I bet if you took the top 20, the guy from the I don't know, the fashion guy from Europe is rich, and Carlos
Yeah.
Slim, and
Right. From
the
Mexico.
yeah.
So you've become a democratic socialist then, because it's just completely wrong. I don't want to go down this track
No,
because that's a different.
but I don't like deny reality. Like, this is a reality that the concentrations of wealth are much greater now, and wealth can be a kind of double-edged sword in that if you are wealthy, you can afford to leverage the complexity of our society and make it work to your advantage by hiring armies of lawyers. And through that
Bankers and
process, you can crush anyone who is small, and it won't be close. And cities and towns and townships and states have proven unwilling to, enforce rule of law in many instances, and we see it most often in, rich people. The son of a rich person will not be convicted of a crime, and a poor person will be convicted of a crime. And a law will be enforced in favor of a rich developer and not, the poor homeowner.
so you get the frustration. You have empathy for liberals, for lack of a better term, right now, who are just pissed at society. They think it's fundamentally unfair.
Yeah,
That we do have a.
no, I just think they have absolutely the wrong solution.
But you understand their frustration, though.
Well, we now have 120 years worth of evidence that regulation makes it worse. that I would say we've got 120 years worth of evidence that Theodore Roosevelt was right and that Woodrow Wilson was wrong. That what we need to do is punish the person who is engaging in the bad act, not try to create a permanent regulation that then becomes essentially a subsidy for wealth.
So who's the group that's advocating for that point right now in America today? Is it the Republican Party? Is it the U.S. Chamber of Commerce? Is it the one that we're affiliated with, the American Enterprise Institute? The answer is maybe yes on the last one. But who belongs to a group that's advocating for that?
I think
anyone.
All of those groups.
But really, barely. Aren't they all kind of arguing for their own thing that helps their regulation? Really, the U.S. Chamber. And by the way, my background, I'm a chamber kind of guy. But you don't think the U.S. Chamber is advocating for regulation?
No, I think they are.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, more regulation, not less regulation.
Well, right. They want regulate. I mean, they're usually the ones who are crying out the most for regulation in order to. I mean, if you think about here's a crazy example. Like the Farm Bill just passed, and certain we got to stop calling it the Farm Bill, right?
Yeah.
It's 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 corporate subsidies and food programs.
Right.
I think the only reason it passes is because we've got some unholy alliance of, here's a big giant pile of regulations that favor corporate agriculture, and here's a big bunch of programs that Democrats love, and let's all just spend the money together. But it's not it's not exactly a fair competition for farmers bill. It's
Well, and boy, we should probably spend a whole conversation on farming, because you do know that Amazon is now starting to will probably eventually be the #1 grocer in America,
yeah,
maybe by far. I mean,
well, I
it's
don't know. I mean, Walmart's a tough,
Walmart's a tough competitor, no doubt, but maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, right? I mean,
yeah, but
we're consolidating everything.
Kroger. I mean, you've got Kroger and Walmart and Amazon. More consolidation in the grocery market. Yep.
And so, but do we have more trust in farmers or the Walmarts of the world, or do we have more faith that things are getting better? I mean, you look at the across the board, it seems like everybody has a distrust of everything these days. So, has that always been true?
Trust of what? I trust companies to be self-interested. If you ask me what I trust Walmart to do, I trust Walmart to try to make money for Walmart.
To maximize Amazon profits. And if they can do it by selling us cheap stuff, then that's how they're going to do it.
To the extent that they have a corporate morality at all, it's, you could pin it to the morality of the people who are in charge. But there are people who are in charge of these giant corporations, and
that they have a fiduciary legal obligation to maximize profit. So, right? I mean,
they do, but they're also moral beings,
sure,
who tend to have some things that they will not do.
I got you. Let me rattle through some of that we haven't talked about yet. Powerful groups, both historically and currently. Military. Isn't that one of the most powerful groups in organizational structure worldwide and historically in America? I mean, Eisenhower to Washington. I mean, military is really powerful, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have more or less so since our founding?
Much more so than
more so powerful right now. That's really powerful. Do you mean the military-industrial complex?
Well, I would also say, especially during our founding, we couldn't even fund the military. The British. I mean, that's one of the reasons we needed a constitution. Is the British were still occupying forts in the United States. I mean, our military was nothing. For most of the early history of the United States,
up till maybe even World War I.
Well, it got big during the Civil War. It was a pretty effective fighting force, relatively speaking. If you think about what they were accomplishing in the years after, in terms of, you had border skirmishes with Mexico-ish. You had, trying to keep the peace between settlers, and they were understaffed for what they were doing. But and of course, I'm not making any judgments about the morality of every individual action taken by the U.S. military with regards to Native Americans. But in terms of the area that they were covering, there were some pretty effective leaders. And we saw some of that come through when it did come time to use them during the Spanish-American War. Mm-hmm. Because we tend to think of that as being somewhat of a military debacle for the United States, how unprepared we were, et cetera. But they were still pretty effective in accomplishing their goals, and it led to a lot of reforms that were coming from within. So that, we need to have Versino on here again he can go into great detail about this. But a lot of the leaders from the sort of Indian War era into the Spanish-American War era were also the ones who laid the groundwork for the reforms that were in place by the time World War I started. And then that core of people who stayed together after World War One really cultivated quite a leadership group that were able to really perform a miracle by the time you get to World War II. And then it's the same guys in many cases. We tend to think of these events as being really far apart, but in many cases, it's the same human beings who were in World War One, the night, the experiencing the retraction during the 1920s, the expansion during the late 30s and 40s, who then end up creating NATO and
Right.
the modern military structure. It's the same guys.
Right.
They lived all that.
So the answer is independent of wealthy families, corporations, religious leaders and organizations. Military is a subset structure group of its own that's powerful, independent of all those other groups. The Venn diagram overlaps all over the place, but the bottom line is you can rise up through the military and become a pretty influential person in society.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Let's handle one that I'd like to. It seems like it's just proliferating, and I don't necessarily mean the Federalist Society, because I don't think that's a secret organization. I mean like Skull and Bones, or I don't even know if that's the name of it, but I am a secret organization. I'm a fraternity guy from college, so that's a secret fraternal organization. But there's a bunch of them out there, from the public ones, the Masons, to the private ones that I don't even know if are real. Are they powerful? Are there some secret groups out there that we should be aware of, that are really controlling the world?
Masonic lodges certainly were. I mean,
but are they still today?
Not really. I mean,
how do you know? Are you in one?
No, but I looked into it like within the last 3 years. I checked to see like what's going on with the local Masonic lodge and who's the leader, and do I know
they're still meeting, right? So
yeah,
how do you know they're not running?
But they're, I mean, I don't mean to disparage the local Masonic lodge, but it's not as big as downtown Rotary, and it's different people, and
that Rotary's that's more of a service organization. That and Optimus and Kiwanis and Sertoma, those are all public. They're not
but at
least
but in my town, Rotary is much bigger and widely attended, and still.
But they kind of run the town then.
I bet
informally, in a way.
Yeah. I guess you.
Okay.
I bet that if you were to create a kind of cross section of the Rotaries and the biggest mega churches, I bet you'd have everybody.
How about the 527 groups and the Koch network?
Well,
I mean, there are some folks out there that are spending a lot of time and money and hiring thousands of people and spending millions.
I think that's maybe that's better known. The other way that 527s are much more powerful than anybody. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard anybody make this point, but 527s have become a de facto branches of government, so that if there's something that government wants to do, I mean, you take like one of the first projects funded under the Great Society was self-help housing, and self-help enterprises is still they were the model for Habitat for Humanity, which if you've ever heard of Habitat for Humanity, they were founded on self-help.
Interesting.
And they were founded here in Visalia, right? But they are not a government agency, but they are. They really are. I mean, they are practically in the permanent legislation, and there's these various organizations that
internationally we refer to those kind of groups as NGOs, non-governmental organizations, or quasi-government.
But they're written into the legislation, and they more or less depend I mean, they do fundraisers and stuff for stuff that the government doesn't pay for, but the amount of money that individuals donate to these organizations is a rounding error. You know,
Interesting.
they're massive agencies and organizations where most of their funding is coming from the state and federal government, and it's written into annual legislation that just gets rolled over to the next
And
year.
you're not disparaging them, you're just talking factually.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if you want to know, like the Sierra Club, right?
Right.
And there's a thing called the Southern Sierra Partnership or something, headed up by the Sierra Club. And state legislation says that every single project in the state of California, you have to have like environmental offsets, and you need to buy these environmental credits, and you have to buy them from these non-governmental, these NGOs, these 527s, and their fund. I mean, it's essentially a tax paid by every city that does any construction, every county, every private citizen, that goes directly into the coffers of a nonprofit organization whose mission is being directed by the government. And they're not really part of the government. They're founded.
Fascinating. Now, but we started with 527s. That sounds slightly different than 527 because does the same organization take money and
Well,
spend
they'd be
it on
like
campaigns?
501c3s. Sorry, 501c3s. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you switched gears and
Yeah,
went in
sorry, but they
the
are nonprofit
501c3.
organizations that are
Yeah.
basically
Okay.
function like government organizations. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure the
Yeah.
record was clear. Those aren't 527s.
No. Well,
Okay. Cool.
some of them do fund 527s. So
Yeah.
it provides a way for the government to give money to 501c3s, so they can sort of, I mean, I guess we could say launder.
Yeah. I got
Taxpayer
legally
dollars and
launder. Yeah.
get taxpayer dollars to political advocates.
Cool. Let me rattle through 10 different other groups that are influential in America, and give a historical perspective if it's gotten stronger or lesser or more influential or nuanced, any history lesson you want to provide under any of these topics. City states. I assume big, powerful cities are still pretty powerful. They make their own regulations that influence other cities, city state. I mean, I don't mean I guess I do mean in the classical form, but big cities in America, are they influential?
Oh yeah, of course. I
Okay.
mean, if you think
And
about Denver's influence in Colorado is probably the clearest example of this. Like,
yeah,
Denver is a hammer, a sword that hangs over the rest of the state of Colorado.
and
Like,
we all kind of have to look at it and go, huh, yeah, darn it. Well, they just regulated that or put in new something. Yeah.
but I
Tax
mean,
this.
even where you live in a city you founded,
Yeah.
or helped found, you're a suburb of Denver.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Everything's a suburb of Denver.
States. California is the most interesting example of it, but states are tremendously powerful groups, right? Whoever runs a state has tremendous influence in national policy, correct?
Oh yeah, I mean, you got the Senate and the Electoral College making sure that no matter how small your state is, the rest of the world has to pay attention.
Yeah. Cool. We talked about, how about like, you mentioned farmers before. How about like rural co-ops and granges? I mean, are they still, historically, I think they had some influence, large landowners that were, growing stuff or ranching stuff. Were they powerful, and are they still?
Yes, I mean, but for every one of these things, the thing that I find frustrating is that, I understand when the Farm Bureau or the Grange used to come in and say, we represent X number of farmers and blah, blah, blah. What I find more disturbing now is when Amazon comes in and tells those Grangers to go pound sand because we're building a warehouse that's going to be worth X, number of dollars. Yes, every group is still influential, but what I find disturbing is how the disparity in power is revealing that you can tell a lot of these traditional groups that used to hold political power, a lot of them are just being, nobody listens to them anymore.
Zeroed out. they're just whatever. Thanks, but no
Yeah.
thanks. We got some big money here, and we're speaking worth it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay,
For good
that
or for
leads
ill. I mean, not that the Farm Bureau is
right.
the center of all knowledge.
A couple weird ones I want to bring up. Bars, the power of the local watering hole. When people sit around and go have a drink, historically, I think the framers of the Declaration of Independence, well, was in Philadelphia. I mean, they got together and had a drink and hashed some of this stuff out.
Yeah.
Is there any social norms or cultural things that if you offend people that are sitting there and drinking in the bars, that all of a sudden it might change everything?
Almost every positive thing I've ever accomplished has happened because of having drinks in a bar with people. And I mean, I used to
Have
have
you ever made that quote before? Is that like on your LinkedIn bio? I mean,
I
everything
probably
positive.
should be. But we used to have drinks every Friday at 5. Actually, we're probably going to do it again today. Haven't done it in months, but and we were able to get a lot done. I mean, a lot of really positive things in the community happened because of that group of people who were having a drink at 5. And it wasn't because had any kind of agenda, but it was like you just put together civically minded people in a relaxed atmosphere, and they're all problem solvers, and somebody else says, oh, I know this, and oh, okay, I know that, and we could probably do something about that. And
So historically and currently, still powerful today. That social network of people getting together at a
yeah, I
watering
kind of
hole.
wish, but I wish it was more.
More,
I wish it was more powerful,
yeah, yeah.
because I mean, the problem is that money crushes that too
Yeah,
in all
yeah.
cases.
How about other weird stuff like fan clubs, whether it's the Jimmy Buffett Parrot Heads or
Oh
the
yeah,
Swifties or the biker clubs, both the kind of scary gang type and the social fun ones, middle-aged guys out there. What
Taylor
are
Swift, if she wanted to be, could be the next president of the United States.
ah
I mean, with the audience that she commands
and the loyalty to that audience, so
and the
right?
loyalty of that audience, if she decided that she wanted to be president of the United States, she could defeat Biden and Trump.
You do understand that's a pretty interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that in the media. I don't know. Has anyone ever written a little column on the power of Taylor Swift politically, if she
No,
chose to?
but I think there are some other celebrity. I mean,
Uh-huh.
basically any celebrity with a massive and loyal following, because Trump's following is bigger now than it was before. But I was trying to think what if there were like Matthew McConaughey, perhaps, if he were to enter the primaries, he could probably do the same thing. But I don't know that he would. I mean, he doesn't have the McConaughey haze or anything. He doesn't have
Right.
an army of loyalists who would do whatever he
So
says.
there's a certain level of fame, whether it's sports or theater or music, entertainment, boxers. I mean, all sorts of different stuff that do have a voice that they can use that have influence in society. It's just is that a group in itself?
Oh yeah,
Celebrities? Okay.
yeah.
Okay. How about social influencers? Are you still down on them, or do you actually think some social influencers, people without any experience, people that just like picked a lane and said, I'm going to promote this line of dresses or running shoes or whatever they're promoting, and then all of a sudden got a huge following, usually from some kind of tawdry dance or something. But what about them? Is that new, or have there always been social influencers?
Yes, yeah. There and I mean, I have a lot of people who I trust their advice. You know, if I trust Zach Kortz and Ari Hemming to tell me, the truth about motorcycles and Spurgeon Dunbar, and I trust, there's a Mormon guy in Utah who talks about shoes. And I sort of, seems like he does a good job of ripping shoes apart. There are people who review watches and cars and smart watches, and every time I'm in the market for one of these things, I find them, and I'm impressed by the level of detail of their reviews, and I think they're doing wonderful, and I hope they're all successful.
And did they used to be around too, 200 years ago? Just in a different forum, obviously. I mean, Ben Franklin, was he a social influencer? What he wrote about?
I think so. I mean, most of it would have been in the form of newspaper publishing and local print
And
media.
then people would talk about it, and more stuff would be sold, or they'd start to have a different type of drink or something. Yeah.
Obviously, the
Okay.
scale and reach is different, but it's similar.
Yeah. Okay. How about a couple big ones that we haven't talked about yet? Unions, labor unions.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't. It's we might be. I mean, I guess we've been past the breaking point when it comes to unions for quite some time. Insofar as I think most people know that the most powerful unions and the largest unions are all public sector unions.
Mm-hmm.
So, private sector unions are pretty small now, and this strike, the two strikes that are taking place right now, the writer strike and the auto strike, I think it's almost unfortunate that they're happening at the same time, because the writer's strike probably needed to happen in some way to, rework.
Technology's just changing everything. It has to.
Yeah, and I really think that the auto worker strike is ill-advised. It reminds me more of like the coal strikes for certain types of, I mean, if you think about it, like there were certain types of coal that were less efficient and harder to mine and burn dirtier and whatever, and they were kind of going away, and their unions would strike for higher wages, and it just ended up being the thing that killed the industry. And
so if you were a prognosticator rather than a historian, you're implying that there's going to be new Elon Musk arrive, new Teslas arrive out of this. It's just going to be too expensive. The legacy cost of these auto industry is just too expensive anyway, and there's going to be an opportunity for a whole revolution in the way cars are made, whether it's competition with China or it's just going to change, and this isn't helpful to the industry. It may be the death knell. Well, not total death knell, but it's going to change dramatically if you were a prognosticator.
Transportation is changing. The way that people view transportation has changed so much so quickly that anybody kind of with the mindset of I'm powerful because I make a car with a gasoline engine and everyone's going to depend on that in 20 years. I just think that's a bad bet to be making right now.
And so, but you're talking the technology of batteries then.
Not just the technology of batteries, but also in how people view their own cars.
Oh, you mean we used to have one because it was freedom loving? I'm an American and I'm going to go drive my car somewhere.
And not just that, but our lifestyles. I mean, when I see people who are commuting on electric scooters and electric bicycles, and then young people who don't care about driving because they take an Uber everywhere, and also don't care about cars at all. They don't care about performance. All they care about is their phones.
So cultural equally as much as technology. You're talking about in the 50s and 60s, you had to have your car because that was your statement of masculinity or entrepreneurship or freedom, or and now we don't care about that at all. It's a cultural revolution.
Yeah, no one cares. I mean, behind my house, I could go out there and take a picture at a stoplight, and no one is sitting there enjoying their car. They're all at a stoplight staring at their phones.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Fascinating. Okay.
I just think it's led to this cultural shift where people don't care about cars anymore. It's just I mean, how much do you care about a ballpoint pen? That's how people put cars down.
Fascinating. I'm taking way too much time as normal, so I got to run four more things from you, by you. Country clubs and yacht clubs and the private places rich people meet. Always been in existence, more so or less so today?
Yeah, but where that kind of thing matters is that someone can have an outside influence in like planting a seed. That's really what happens in places like that, where um, you know, and this is no different than someone being a neighbor. But if you had someone who you associated with in a social sense, I mean, we've talked about Hiram Lewis, right? We're friends because of motorcycles, and but because I like him as a person, I'm predisposed to hear him out on his ideas.
And help sell his recent book,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Free.
Well, but we became friends after that, but yeah, I mean, his next book certainly,
Sure.
and I want good things for him, you know, and that would be true if we belong to a motorcycle club or a country club, or some or it's I belong to the Sportsman's Association, and I don't shoot as much as I used to, but I used to hang out with a bunch of old guys at the shooting range, and when you're interacting with these people as human beings and saying, "Whoa, that was an amazing shot," and then when you realize, oh, this person is also, their granddaughter is an English teacher at a high school, you say, "Oh, okay, well, that's good. I bet she's a great teacher."
Right.
These networks can sometimes influence you.
Media, both traditional print and magazines, periodicals, and talk radio, and social media, but not how we use it. But the influencers in social media, still important today, or it's losing relevance?
Important but splintered. I mean,
Splintered
it's
is
just
the
so
right. Yeah.
splintered and fragmented that
Yeah.
it's hard to call them on.
Okay, there's this is the last big one. I didn't even get to de Tocqueville and kind of his observations and whether they're still true today, or the power or importance of America. But there are a couple big groups that I haven't mentioned, which we seem to talk about all the time. And I don't mean you and me, society. Age, AARP, and or protecting youth. Gender, and how that group influences each other. And of course, the other big one that everybody seems to talk about on the nightly news every day, race. Are those groups on things that you can't truly self-define? Almost all these other things, you can determine whether you want to be rich. I know it's hard, but you still can determine if that's a priority in your life, to be wealthier. Or to be more studied, educated, or more of a drinker. You can determine where you're more of a shooter, but race, gender, age, they're kind of defined for us. But boy, they seem like powerful groups, historically and currently. Give us a little bit of a history lesson, and then we'll see if Bart or Jake have any questions.
Well, race is often defined by other people, but you can take you can play a pretty powerful role in how you let it define you. Gender is somewhat more interesting, I think, because I've often said, like, even if we were really terrible at handling ethnic tension, just living next to one another and having kids, it makes all of those distinctions go away. But gender is one of those things that really doesn't go away, simply because of the biological fact that only women can have babies. So that means that it's one of those things that's always been with us and always will be with us, and will always be a distinction. And if we had one set of human beings who knew how to fly and others who couldn't, we would say, "Oh, look at this very obvious difference between these two groups of people. Like, women create life." So that seems like a pretty big deal that isn't going away. But what was the last group that you?
Well, age, gender, and race.
Age. And age is also somewhat interesting because it's based a lot on perception. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that we made as a culture was listening to young people too much. And
don't tell young people that. They're mad that we're not listening enough.
Yeah, well, So what? I, you know, uh,
There
I'm
goes your
that, you know.
there goes your tenure statement again. I've got tenure.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
there's this there's this movie called Friday with Ice Cube. Don't know if you know. Anyway, great line where this prostitute tells Smokey, "Hey, I'm going to remember that you did this," and he said, "Remember it, then write it down, take a picture." Like I
No, what's it
don't,
matter?
I
You
don't
see?
know. He says, "I don't give an F." Like you know.
Right. And so, what was your point on age? I don't want to make
Oh,
just
just
because I
like
was flippant. I don't
I
want
mean,
to.
I think it's strange that people uh, somehow, you know, want to deny that you're going to get old and you're going to die. These are, uh, if everything goes well, right? That if everything goes well, you will get old and you will die. Um, and I would say plan accordingly. Um, so I find it very strange when we pretend that neither of those things is ever going to happen, and therefore we should listen to the people who are furthest away from those things. Now that doesn't mean that
Ah,
I think that the mere past.
wisdom. You're talking about wisdom and experience and
Yes, but I
knowledge
also
and.
want to emphasize that the mere passage of time does not indicate wisdom, right? Because there are uh, I'm sure you know people like this, but you know, I know 55-year-old teenagers, and I know
Yeah.
20-year-olds who are wise,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and have good character. So the mere passage of time is not enough
Right.
to
Right.
warrant influence to me.
Well, I have a lot more to talk about and ask questions of you, but it would be unfair not to let Jake and Bart jump in now.
Well, I have a
And
question
so,
for you. I just
please.
want, what was the overarching theme? Like where were you going with this? The
What
because
I'm trying to do is plant seeds, Professor, on if you're dissatisfied and disgruntled as a citizen, and you're wanting to make a more impact in life. Do you join a political party? Well, they're not. I mean, they're less and less, at least in Colorado, becoming unaffiliated. Do you have to be rich to have an influence? No, but it helps. Should you use your congregation and be advocating this or that policy, or should you surround yourself with good people at the bar or a service organization? So this disconnection, I'm one that's not particularly that, remember that book, I think it's 20 or 30 years old now, about Bowling Alone. I've never been a huge subscriber to that thought. I actually think it's just fragmented and people don't really know what's going on today. It's just so you can be really active in a tiny little subculture in society. And no one knows about it because they're not on that private, text group or whatever. But I am seeing disillusionment from some folks that are really surprising me. These are mainstay, thoughtful, wise people who keep leaning towards we're heading to a civil war and it's never been this bad. And I'm observing that. So I really appreciated your comment a month or two ago where you said, no, most people are lazy. We wouldn't be a very good civil war, because that helps temper my other thoughts that I hear from people. But there's a lot of dissatisfaction across the spectrum.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get some historical approach where people can hang their hat, where do they need to belong to a gardening club or a hiking group, or do they go back to church or have more kids or take care of their elderly, or, there's lots of ways it can manifest itself, but I'm hoping to plant seeds for somebody who listens to this and go, you know what, that's true. I should just be a better neighbor.
Let me
I
ask
don't know
Jake
how.
this. Jake, look up the Apple of Gold, Abraham Lincoln fragment on Constitution and Union. And what is the last sentence of that fragment on Constitution of Union? It's something like that we may act so that we might see the points of danger, or something along those lines. Because I think that's the closest thing I've got to an answer. And Lincoln
Okay.
probably said it better. Here he has it: that we may so act, we must study and understand the points of danger. I would say get your head screwed on straight first, orient your values, know where the points of danger are, and orient your values according to the points of danger in society. I early on always felt like I was distrustful of any emotional experience that I was having in a group, because I so wanted to avoid becoming a Nazi, right? I was like, I know Nazis are bad, so whatever they do, I want to do the opposite, right?
And you're talking when you were a young man,
Yeah,
in your
when I was
formative
young,
years. Yeah.
so anytime I found myself being sort of swept up in a group experience, I would always have this thing in the back of my head that said, don't let yourself get swept up here. And that's what I mean by understand the points of danger. There are certain things that feel good that are bad, and know where those things are. Orient your values that way. And then the next thing I would say is make things, do things, and create things. Be involved in the production of something. Something that you can put a bow on it and say, I did this, and it doesn't really matter if it's an article that gets published, or a fence that gets built, or a sidewalk that gets poured, or a poem that gets finished. Just make something that involves finishing, and get into the habit of finishing things. And
Did you hold on? Remember your next thought. But let me interrupt. You got your next thought?
And then engage, right? And then
Okay.
and then surround yourself with people of high character, and try to be around good, wise people and listen to what they say. Take good advice.
So that was really interesting that you just kind of it seemed like extemporaneously came off the top of your head. That's repetitive. Make things, do things, create things, be involved in the production of something. Is that a stolen quote, or did you just create that, or have you written that down before?
I had never thought about any of this stuff until you just asked me 7 minutes.
It's kind of a good meme, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of one of those little inspirational meme things. Professor Stephen Tootle.
Well, I would just say, remember, that's number 2.
Okay.
I don't want that to stand alone, because
all right, what was number 1 again then?
The first thing was that we may so act, we must study and understand danger. Yeah. That's Lincoln. Like, or as I said, get your head screwed on straight first.
Yeah. That was too academic for me, or intellectual for me. I'm more of a street fighter. Anybody can understand make things, do things, great things.
Well, can you understand get your head screwed on straight?
Yeah, but what's that mean, though? I mean,
it means understand where your temptations are.
Okay, from that angle, I get. Yeah.
And then once, because the thing is, if you don't do the first thing first, if you don't understand where your temptations are,
you're going to make a lot of weird stuff.
Well, you're just going to, you will, it will be a house of cards, whatever you build.
Fascinating.
And it's as likely to be something that destroys you or society as it is to be something that actually helps. So I really want to emphasize that first part first.
Yeah, I hear you. And there was also the number 3: surround yourselves with men or people of integrity and character. And so those are your 3.
Yeah, that's all. That's something I could come up with on the fly.
Crazy helpful. Thank you. Jake or Bart, we're almost out of time, but I feel bad by, as always, almost always going long. What am I missing? What insights do you have? What do you want the professor to be thinking about for future conversations? Jake.
Yeah,
man, look at that beard on you. For Spotify listeners in the future, you won't see his crazy beard, man. You look Amish. Speaking of groups, you look Amish or Mennonite. That's cool.
Did you see I'm wearing my Ashland shirt, by the way, Jake?
Yeah, I know. I've got an Ashland polo, but I need to get like actual Ashland t-shirts to wear around.
As seen on Ted Lasso, by the way.
Okay, that's the Ted Lasso one. Okay.
Yeah.
That is really nice. Jake, can you hear me? Are you good to go? You have questions?
I don't have questions per se. I do have a comment on what you said about bowling alone. I do feel like the book does have meaning, because it talks about what's called in sociology the third place. And your third place is your place outside of work or your home where you interact with people and you have a sense of community. And I think that's kind of the main message of Bowling Alone is third places in general, like physical third places are going away. And so, I mean, if I think about my students at my high school, they don't really do, like if they don't do an after school activity, they don't have much of a third place anymore. And most of my students probably just go home to not do the homework I assigned them, but to sit on social media. But social media doesn't really count as a third place because you're not physically interacting with people. Like the way that you would interact with someone in a bowling league is a lot different than how you interact with people. I hope it's different how you interact with people online.
And I think that Jake is right, and maybe more right than he even realizes. I think it actually is one of the reasons why people get depressed is because if you have a one-legged stool and somebody kicks that one leg out, you fall on the ground. You know, in other words, if the people if the popular kids are picking at you at school and you think this is the whole world, there is no world outside of this world. You can't retreat to your DeMolay club to bring back the Masons, right? You can't go back to your church youth group, and you can't go back to your 4-H organization and have those people tell you, oh, you know, you're a good person. Like they're the ones who are messed up. You think you have no choice but to think that this thing that I'm experiencing is the whole world, especially when you're young. You know, we kind of forget what it's like to be how much when you're young, you're so self-centered and you think whatever you're doing, this is the only thing that matters in the world. And thus, when that thing is going poorly, you can just spiral. If you do not have these third places that Jake was talking about.
So I love disagreeing with two learned men. Food for thought for future conversations, Jake and Professor. The third place is so diffuse and so hidden now that I don't think we see how interconnected those folks that you think are loners just on their computer. I see it every single day where some loner is climbing a 14er, but he puts on a group going, hey, I'm going to go solo this 14er. And dozens of people go, hey, you want a partner, or I'll give you a ride, or hey, watch out for this cliff area. And then they get together, and then all of a sudden they've got a tribe of 2 or 3 people to go climb the next 14er. And they're not members of the Colorado Mountain Club, which is how people used to go climb 14ers. But no one knows about it unless you're watching these millions upon millions of micro conversations around the world on every imaginable topic. Prove me wrong.
But John, you're just stating what I'm talking about, because you say like the group may start online, but they start meeting in person eventually.
Right.
Like that's the third place where you can have human interaction with people.
I think they're doing that. We just don't know they're doing it.
Well, but that's the thing. Like, I'd be fine if my students
were actually doing it.
Yeah. If my students were getting online and it's like, okay, this is my local like longboarding community online. Let's meet up at the skate park.
Right.
But the thing is, I have extremely depressed students who skip out on my class all the time to go see the school psychologist or the school counselor. And I know that's where they're at.
Yeah.
And they tell me that life has no meaning because to them, they go to school, they get done with school, they go home, and then there's nothing for them to do except get online and see the death spiral of humanity.
Yeah, doom scrolling. I do think there's probably in the last 5 or 10 or 15 years, it's gotten worse on that. I concur with you on that. I do see great hope all the time, though. Just to counter, I see loners not being as lonely as we think they are because they're actually hooking up with other people in a variety of hopefully noble ways. But it is the topic. Professor, tell me how I'm wrong as well.
Well, I agree with Jake. Like, if it's a tool for people getting together and doing things and making things and creating things, and when they're climbing, you literally use the example of climbing a mountain. When I lived in Colorado, I got into like peak bagging. Right? You're just like, I can say I've done this. That's another one in my bag. Like, I've accomplished this thing. You couldn't have used a worse example, John.
That's funny. All right, I'll ponder that.
Yeah.
Other comments or questions, Jake or Bart?
Oh, thank you, guys. I think this has been great. You know, and I agree with the premise of this discussion. I think that our society exists through informal communication links among people. And a lot of that occurs very informally through different organizations that you're part of. And one of the things I think we need to do is we need to concede that social media is not necessarily the most horrible thing ever invented by humans. I know it is right now creating loneliness among people. I think it's undeniable that that's happening. But I agree with Jake that having a third, several third places to go to in your life is extremely important. And if people can get there through social media, I think that's fine. I do think we have people in our society who think social media is that third place. It really isn't. Mm-hmm. People don't realize that, I guess. But, I can think of so many things in my life where informal communication with people has resulted in things that are really cool. And, I can go to an event and I can talk to somebody who will talk to somebody else and something will happen. And, mm-hmm. and I'm referring to things in government because unfortunately that's my business. But the reality is a lot of the stuff I do is not formal. It's not like I testify before legislative committees and city council and stuff like that. I talk to people who I know are doing that or who are behind people who are doing that. And I can make good things happen. And there are times where people put me out front. I'll suggest something and they'll go, "Oh, Bart, it's your turn. You need to do this." But I think that's how our society works. And I think that's what, Professor Tootle and John were talking about in terms of the power of various organizations to do things. And, and I think we are going through a period where there is an extreme reorganization among the groups that are powerful in our society. We're looking to those groups to do a whole lot of stuff that they can't do anymore. And we all have to find a way to do what needs to get done in a different way, and I think the four of us even sitting here talking, even though it's virtual, this is social media, it's going a long way. I mean, Professor Tootle, you're a respected historian on the West Coast. I know you can frown about that, but the reality is you are. Jake, you're kind of on your way to becoming that. You're just, you're going through that process. No, don't shake your head. You'll get there eventually. And John, you're already a thought leader in our area.
I'm a guy. I'm definitely a guy.
So I think all in our own way are making this all possible.
So a reaction to that, Professor, because I have one as well.
Yeah, I guess I want to reiterate something I've said earlier, which is these things can be forces for good or for evil, depending on the values of the people who are doing it. And it doesn't matter if it's a social media or an informal network. If it's good people with good values talking about things that will make life better for people, then it's a force for good. But if it's a bunch of bad people talking about how to pile up more money for themselves and harm the weak, then it's a force for ill. So more, getting back to like the founding of the country, we have a natural law foundation and we have a written constitution, a liberal structure, and the liberal structure is only of value if we have the character to put it into action. And the same is true of our Constitution. If you don't have the people who actually follow it, you might as well write it in pencil. But good laws are important, but as Theodore Roosevelt said, and I can't remember if it was a letter to, he was either Lincoln Steffens or Upton Sinclair. It was one of, but he said, we need better, again, gendered language. He said, we need better men, better laws, and better administration of laws. And by far, the first is the most important. It was true in 1906 or 1908, because I can't remember if it was the Steffens or the Upton Sinclair. One of them was from 06, one of them was from 08, I think. But it's the get your head on straight first, because that is the prerequisite. It's the culture that determines whether these institutions are good or bad. It was Steffens. All right. See, that's why I'm
shocking that
your magic fingers can find that letter so fast.
So food for thought, Professor and Bart. A theme that I'm concerned about is not even knowing our own bubbles. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about that. How much am I just listening to the same types of people or the same, and what's really going on out in society? So I intentionally, maybe not well, but I intentionally are trying to pierce my own bubble, searching for other thoughts. And I get surprises every day because I do that. And I go, oh, wow. So I'm trying to figure out how groups think that don't think like I do. But I don't know if most people do that. I think they're just in the same bar, or Jake, to your point, in the same social media circle or the same isolation, not realizing there's a lot of other people that feel isolated too, and they do need to go down to the local skate park and see that there's somebody else also lonely, and they could pal up, and I'm not minimizing mental health issues. I just think people don't understand that there's a lot of other people like them, and there's a lot of other people doing things they have no idea about, and we should just kind of open our horizons a little bit into different groups.
You know who Eugene Volokh is? He's actually just leaving UCLA, law professor, and he's moving up to be a full-time fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford. But He came here to speak once, and he made the best argument I've ever heard against, or I should say, for bubbles. Because we were at dinner and I was making an argument very similar to you and talking about the richness of life and how it's important to reach out and talk to people who aren't like you and stuff, and talked about bubbles and he said, I've worked very hard for my bubble. I want to preserve it, and I don't want anybody to ever break through. And I thought, oh, well, I guess if you have entered into a kind of deliberative process of self-reflection and, based on who you are and what you value and what you, again, knowing where your temptations are, maybe for some people, you need a bubble.
I think there's great safety and security in bubbles that are
he's a
proper yacht club.
Eugene Volokh, and a brilliant contrarian.
I don't know how that was persuasive. I think that's almost a matter of fact. Go ahead, Jake.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because I think of my third places that I hang out outside of work and home, and it's mostly hanging out with my wife, and we do different activities with different friends. Like we have a pickleball group that we go to.
Yay!
Yeah. Pickleball has taken over my home state. It's crazy.
Taken over the world. I just left the gym where there were armies of people playing pickleball.
Bart and I live in a city where they made an emergency ordinance against new pickleball courts. An emergency ordinance against pickleball courts. Yeah.
But
anyway, keep going.
We've got a core group that we play pickleball with every week. And if you're not on the court playing, you're on the side hydrating. We have a good system to switch out and stuff so we can rest. But when we're sitting on the side, we just have conversations about life with people, but it's within our bubble. And a couple weeks ago, someone that's kind of on the fringe of our bubble invited some of her own friends who we don't know. And they were professional pickleballers, and they were just, dominating us. But the thing is, when we were sitting next to them on the side, we weren't talking about stuff. We were just sitting there because they're outside of the bubble. So we didn't feel comfortable discussing issues with them.
Yeah.
But the thing is, within our bubble, we are having these thought-provoking conversations while we're waiting to play. And we're not talking about pickleball. We're just talking about life, the economy, politics, inflation, etc. And so there is a point to within bubbles, a lot of good things can happen.
Yeah.
No doubt. As long as it doesn't get to Star-Bellied Sneetches from Seuss, and read that book again if you haven't. If it's just an artificial bubble that means nothing. So I like that you excluded those Olympian pickleballers that try to invade your court.
Pickleball ringers.
All right, we need to end today. But Professor, I always try to give you the last word. You asked why I thought these lines of questions were important, and at least I gave you an inkling of what I'm trying to solve, what I'm trying to sort through or help guide other people. After I've given you that, now, do you have a better option, or do you have a better thing we should be talking about? Is there some other unkicked rock?
I don't have any solutions for this, but we covered a couple of things that I think are under-examined sources of unearned privilege and power in society. And I wish that we had some institutional way of undoing some of those things. Because
say it again in different words. I'm not sure I'm following you.
I just think that there are people of bad character who exercise an undue influence in politics and culture. And I guess, you know the movie LA Confidential?
I've heard of it, but I don't know if I've seen it.
One of the MacGuffin in LA Confidential is the name Rollo Tomassi. And you should watch LA Confidential. It's a great movie.
Okay.
But in it, there's a guy who invents this character, Rollo Tomassi, when he's a kid. And he's the reason he becomes a cop, is because he wants to convict Rollo Tomassi. And he says, well, who's Rollo Tomassi? And he says, he's the guy who gets away with it. And, there's this part of, I guess, all of us, but it still bugs you when there's the guy who's getting away with it. And there are these concentrations of power where people are getting away with it, and it just eats at me,
That's worthy of a topic, a conversation all to its own. So I'm glad I asked. Thank you. Last call, anyone, or should we just say goodbye?
I'm gonna go pick up my groceries at Walmart right now.
There you go. Thanks for supporting Bezos. All right. Have a great day, Professor. Yeah. Thanks. Go ahead. What?
The Walton family. Yeah.
That's correct. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. That was the other rich family. Okay. Professor, have a great day. Thanks again for your time, Jake and Bart. Talk to you soon.